Yes, Sam, can you
I
hear
can
me?
hear you. Really sorry that I got the time wrong here.
No problem. I have some questions from community that they have asked.
Sure. So yeah, I have a couple questions. Read the margin accounts. I mean, there's sort of all this talk about the terms of service. Did you break terms of service? Did you not? You're basically claiming that there was this separate side of your terms of service, which said that if people had margin accounts, you could use kind of their funds, or there was looser language around that. But I talked to somebody from Alameda and asked how big the position of like, or how many people had assets in the type of accounts that terms of service would apply to versus the regular terms of service, which said you couldn't use their money. And they said it was about $1 billion that was in the margin trading or the margin side of things where you could reuse their funds or whatever. And there was the rest of it was not there. So does that mean the rest of the money was stolen? I mean, like, it seems like you're putting all your eggs behind this one excuse about, there was this separate side of the terms of service. How do you address everyone else?
So I don't have all the data in front of me. My memory is that it was substantially more than $1 billion in the margin trading program. But I don't have that data in front of me right now, so I can't verify that. On top of that, there were other effects as well. And I don't have the data about all the details of those in front of me. But my understanding is that some of those were early wire transfers sent directly to Alameda, which I think contributed to the position as well. And then there are open futures positions on top of that, on top of the spot margin positions, where there can be effectively socialized losses clawback if one is unable to be closed in time. And so I think it was a combination of those factors. There may have been other factors too, but that's what I've been, able to piece together. And that, putting those together, I think is likely how you got to most of this. But
But
again,
here's the thing. How do you account for maybe the difference in what people are hearing from insiders who are not being accused of fraud and you who sort of is? There's a very different sort of story going on here where you're saying like, oh, there's this big position that we didn't know about, because you told me that the last time we spoke in a space, and I went and followed up and I said, hey, is this true? Could it be that this number just wasn't known about? And some Alameda insiders said, no way. You could see on dashboards really simply where it was. And FTX dashboards, not Alameda dashboards, dashboards that you yourself had access to. So my question is sort of like, it seems like when I go to Alameda insiders or FTX insiders, they're saying this story makes no sense. But when I go to you, who sort of has every incentive to sort of lie and obfuscate, because obviously the incentive here is, well, otherwise you might go to jail, which obviously would be a very bad thing for you. It seems like all of a sudden all the excuses come out, and then when we follow up on them, they don't seem to be true. So I don't know, like, help me square this, because it'd be nice if you were telling the truth, but everything we're hearing from insiders is that you're not.
I don't know what to tell you. I'm saying what I believe. I don't know which insiders you're talking about. I don't know exactly what they said. It doesn't line up with my beliefs, but I can't speak to what they think or what they said.
But
I'm
why are
sorry you can't give
multiple
me
people
more, but
within your company at less senior roles knowing more about the company than you?
and Alameda was not a company that was running at the time. But I hear you. I'm sorry. I don't know exactly what you're referring to. I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know what they said. I don't.
Well, I'm telling you what some of what they said. I mean, for
And
example, one of
I
them was
know
that there was like that backdoor system or whatever. A, that you knew it existed, and B, that it was easy to see the balance or the position of Alameda very simply on FTX dashboards, because
uh
they had a margin trading account with you guys, so you guys could have seen it.
but
You guys could see the margin positions of
but
everybody. No,
but a lot of position did not appear in that main account.
so where was the position?
It was in a separate stub account, I believe, related to wire transfers that had been sent, to Alameda Research, generally primarily to FTX, having its own bank account.
So who controlled the secret stub account?
I
Did
I'm
anyone at Alameda know about this secret stub account? I mean, are we supposed to believe that just like there was this stub account that nobody knew about?
I don't know who knew about what when. I'm sorry.
I mean, clearly somebody lost the money, right? Like, obviously the money went somewhere. Somebody lost it. It just seems really convenient that $8 billion was located in this like account that didn't show up when you pulled up Alameda's balances, right?
Yeah, I I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, so a separate question is obviously around this Forbes thing, because you've said you don't have present knowledge of sort of like Alameda's balances, and they came out and said that you were giving them up to date balances from Alameda. How do you square that? Just as of a month ago, you knew Alameda's position. How does that square with your statement about like you don't know what's going on?
I haven't seen the thing that you're referring to, but I was able to give very rough approximations that included a subset of the list of assets that Alameda had. By asking about the assets I believe to be the largest sets of them. I was not giving full accounting. Of all of Alameda's balances or positions, because I didn't generally have those, and because it was a complicated process dependent on liquidity of tokens and things like that from the Ford's perspective. So I was just sending them a sort of abbreviated partial list of Alameda assets periodically.
But that means you knew that what Alameda had, even roughly, you knew what Alameda had.
I had a rough sense of what their assets are. That is correct. By rough, I do mean to within $10 billion or so. I did not have a fine-grained sense of what their total asset value was, and I did not have a fine-grained sense of their liabilities or of their margin position size or how that was split up.
I guess one of my questions is like, what do you think should be done if we find out that you're lying about all of this? Like, sort of, because it's kind of one thing to steal people's money. It's another thing to lie about it. What do you think should be done? Like, because I mean, it's going to be, obviously, a lot of this is going to eventually get litigated. Eventually Caroline Ellison's going to have to take the stand. What happens if she pulls out text messages that shows you knew about it? I mean, do you think that wipes away your credibility?
I mean, I think a lot of my credibility has already been wiped away, frankly. And
I think that's fair.
Honestly, that's not what I'm thinking about right now. I'm not trying to focus on, I'm just thinking about like customers here who I think are what matter.
So you're saying there's a chance for them to get money back, or for us to get our money back?
I don't want to speak out of turn, and I can't make promises on behalf of the company. I can't speak on behalf of the company. And I don't know what decisions everyone's going to make. I do know that FTX US, to my knowledge, is totally solvent and could, I think, return everyone's money tomorrow if it wanted to. And I think internationally, there are a lot of pathways, potentially forward there that one could imagine FTX International taking. I think, I know that as of before I filed, there were billions of dollars of like serious funding offers potentially on the table, and I would expect and hope that those are being deeply.
Who are those funding offers?
I don't know that I have authority to say.
Well, you said you had $4 billion that came in, right?
Yep.
Does that still exist? Was that ever real?
I think it. I think it. I don't know for sure, but I think that some of those might. My guess is that some of them might. I hope that the sort of relevant teams are doing whatever they can to maximize value for customers here.
Yeah, it just kind of doesn't make a lot of sense why someone would pour $4 billion when you guys have liabilities sort of as high as you do. Can you talk a bit about the mark to market like statements you were making around solvency? You're making some pretty outrageous statements about like FTX, had the money when a lot of it was Serum, FTT, these tokens that you can't sell in those amounts, and that would completely crash the price. They can't support that kind of selling. Were you kind of deliberately misleading people there?
So what I can say is I was just thinking about them in terms of, their market price was just whatever their market price was at the time. And, obviously I was cognizant of the fact that, you can't, the market price isn't necessarily, is never, what you could sell a large amount of something for. But I also massively misjudged that discrepancy there. And,
what do you mean you massively misjudged it? Because you knew sort of roughly the percentage of Serum and FTT you held, and you knew the trading volume. I mean, you are a smart guy. You're a professional trader. There's no way you make a simple mistake like that, right? Like, how's that even possible?
I mean, it was a pretty big misjudgment and mistake that I made. and a pretty embarrassing one, but I was thinking of it internally in the context of standard market environment, and obviously that still means, substantial impact. But it's a different scale than what you would see, than what we did see in the market crash that happened, where without selling, without liquidating the position, there was a much larger than 50% market crash in a few day period, with very little bid-side liquidity, and that obviously history has said again and again that those events are possible, those very correlated market crashes, and not just very correlated market crashes in those instruments, but ones where hedges don't end up working fully or even
right,
much
but
at all.
we don't even need to have this market crash for the statement about mark to market accounting making no sense, right? And you just said that yourself. Even with standard movements, right? If you tried to sell the amount of serum or FTT that you had on the books, you wouldn't have gotten half, you wouldn't have gotten a quarter of what you put on your books to investors. And so the question is like, we know that you're not, the problem is like every time it comes to this hard point, the answer seems to always be, I made an embarrassing mistake. But at what point are you going to say like, no, I'm a smart guy, right? You were at the highest levels of this entire industry. You were the guy to go to, the smartest guy in the room, right? It's hard to believe that you made this many embarrassing mistakes. One embarrassing mistake, I get it. But everything's an embarrassing mistake. At least tell us that you knew that the mark to market made no sense.
And the way that I was thinking about risk at score was starting with mark to market and then adjusting down effectively from that. And obviously that means that there should be a real buffer because of exactly what you're saying. That buffer should have been a lot larger than I was thinking of.
But you never went down from risk from there. And you said publicly, FTX is solvent. Other views may differ. Well, there is no other view on it. There's the fact of how markets work, and you were making public misleading statements. It wasn't one time you did this. You continued to make misleading statements about it after people had given you pushback. So
sorry, which times are you talking about here?
I think it was in one of your follow-ups about the what happened. You said something about other views may differ.
Oh, that was FTX US, was it not?
I'm going to look it up real quick. I'll follow up.
In the meantime, Cash22, you have a question, you can ask. Go ahead, please.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Crypto Hindu. Hi, Sam. I think you might be a good guy in real life, but in my opinion,
Jesus Christ,
I think you're a pathological liar. I think you're a scammer. I wanted you to follow me before you go to prison for a long time. I think everyone knows what you are.
No, that's not
Sam,
helpful.
and I don't know how your lawyers are letting you do this, Sam. You're just talking and you're saying the same stuff over and over again.
This is
Sam, you're going to
I'm
prison.
really, really sorry.
This is not helpful.
Sam dipped off.
Yeah, that was a terrible question.
Yeah, I don't know what that question was about. I mean,
I have 4 questions. Please, can I ask them if he comes back? They're all technical. I'm an exchange architect. I have deep questions and people I know that have built his exchange.
No, I don't think Sam's coming back. I mean, this guy just like...
Thank you so much for joining again. And Marty has some questions for
Sam.
you.
I've known you in a previous life. I'm a exchange architect. I've architected a few exchanges, and I just have a couple of questions I haven't heard anyone ask you. The first question I have is, what are you going to do about Solana and the reputation of the developers community, etc., that have been devastated? And what is the future of Alameda's 13% holding? If you could answer that first.
I feel really bad about what's happening to Solana. And I mean, at the end of the day, like it's its own community with its own product, and I'm hopeful and optimistic that at the end of the day, the product, and whatever products are best, whatever technology is best, will win out. And obviously, I've been really excited about what Solana's been building for a while.
So the question is, are you an actual fan of Solana, or was it merely a trading strategy?
No, yeah, I am an actual fan of it.
Would it be possible for you to go public and just try and help that situation with a word of praise and explain that it wasn't a trading strategy, because people are very skeptical? That's my first question. Anyway, I would love if you could do that on Twitter or one of your interviews. Just help Solana. They really are devastated.
I would be happy to do that. I wasn't sure if it would even be necessarily good for them right now. But
the future of the Alameda holding, I think, drove the price down because people believe that they're just going to sell it off in the auction. Is that true? Do you know anything about what will happen?
I mean,
to the 30%?
I don't think it's 30%. I think it's substantially
13.
Oh,
Sorry,
13.
13. 1
I don't know what will happen there. That's not what I would do. It's not what I would think the right thing to do would be. It's not what I was anticipating would happen. It's not what I thought a Chapter 11 process would look like. But I can't speak on behalf of other people about what will happen.
My personal thought would be you could influence them to just hand it back to the foundation so they could lock it up again. But anyway, that would be a very good gesture.
I
and a
would love it
positive
if
light.
something like that could happen.
Okay, maybe you can think about that.
Yeah.
The second question is just a quick question. If 10 people sent $16,000 into FTX, all trying to buy one Bitcoin, and in the user interface it showed them having one Bitcoin, was there ever a layer one Bitcoin to meet that obligation?
Yeah, so there were a lot of layer one Bitcoins on FTX, and obviously some people had margin positions open, had shorts open on Bitcoin, which meant that the sum total of longs was larger than the sum total of all positions because of short positions. But the number of Bitcoins was equal to the total net Bitcoin balances of all users, and also because there wasn't this wire transfer thing with I think that the total short position size, I think, or negative position size or whatever was substantially smaller, I think, on Bitcoin than on dollars.
So a follow-up question, just to
Yep.
continue that. So if I send $100 through, a payment gateway into FTX,
Yep.
what was the flow of that money? I mean, do you know? So just the steps. Where did the money go? Did it go directly into a bank account, or was it? Could you talk through that just from a sort of schematic,
Yeah.
a flow chart? Where would the money go? And the other question I have, which is interesting, no one's ever asked you, but all those users have paid 50% capital gains on that synthetic Bitcoin. Apparently, there's quite an interesting situation with that because no assets did exist. The IRS probably is going to ring the bell on that. That would be an interesting thing for you to discuss at some point as well, is the FTX US taxable obligations and have they been met? But if you could talk through the flow of fiat, I think that would be very helpful for
Totally.
everybody.
Well, I'll just say briefly on the last point again. To my knowledge, FTX US is fully solvent, and so none of these problems, I think, should exist on FTX US. On the payment processor flow of funds, I think basically it depended on exactly which payment processor. Different ones worked in different ways, but for most of them, the way that it would work would be that basically, a user would wire in, $100 to some payment processor, and in some cases that was straight to an FTX bank account. In other cases, it would go to, that payment processor, which then, periodically would batch, generally like batch transfer that over to one of FTX's bank accounts, and one or another would end up in in an FTX system at the end of as you say, at the end of the day, but sometimes the end of the week or the end of the month. That is what generally happened with most of the payment processor pathways that were there.
So the fiat was just accumulated, aggregated into account. Do you remember what commercial bank you guys were using?
There were a bunch of different banks, partially because there are a bunch of different countries, obviously, and we had different setups in different countries. Obviously, we had accounts at a lot of the standard, a lot of the sort of standard banks that operate a lot in the crypto ecosystem. But I think I want to say there were like 10 or 15 total banks that customers would be interfacing with in one way or another, globally.
Is there any outstanding obligation with those banks?
Obligation like from FTX to those banks, do you mean? Or
correct? Are they owed money, or do they owe FTX money?
I mean, I would unless there are things I'm forgetting. To my knowledge, they may have some of FTX's money, custodied in them. I can't think of a reason that FTX would owe them money.
Point being, would the bankruptcy court just pursue the bank directly to get customers' funds outside of the FTX control?
I would guess so.
Okay.
Thanks, Marty.
One more question.
Bro, you've been taking up a lot of airtime with these questions. That's shilling Solana, so I think it's been enough, man.
So just one question, Sam. I know you have to go, and I have to take my sons to birthday party too. And Coffeezilla, we can end this with you. Like you can ask last question, but I have a question from Indian community, and I will translate this in Hindi as well for
Yep.
our community. So we have seen this, and whatever will happen to you will happen. And I hope all of us will get our money back. Things may turn out good. I'm not sure you're saying lie or not, but my question is this: what one exchange should provide to its customer for transparency that
Yeah.
FTX didn't or you guys missed? I know we're talking about proof of reserve, proof of liability, but is that enough? And let me now translate this in Hindi so that people
Yep.
understand. तो मैं पूछ रहा हूँ कि यहाँ पर एक exchange को proof of reserve देना या proof of liability देना सही है या फिर कुछ और? क्या important चीजें जो एक exchange में हमें देखनी चाहिए कि ऐसा कुछ ना हो या हमें पता चल जाए पहले? Sorry, Sam. Yeah, go ahead. It's all asked in Hindi as well.
Yeah. So I mean, there are a lot of things I wish we provided, and I think
No, one more time. It's what you
yeah
would have provided, but going further,
totally.
like in future, what we should see in an exchange, what they should provide, and is proof of reserve enough?
So I think proof of reserves is a part of it. I think there are other things that exchanges could do as well that I wish we had done. I think one of those is total transparency on all of the the size of open positions, on what the aggregate open positions are. Exchanges generally do that with futures open interest, but they don't always do that with margin position open interest. And I think they also don't necessarily do that in terms of position concentration risk. And I think there's some statistics around that could be shown. On top of those, when you look at transactions, at trades that happen on the exchange, those are happening on a centralized exchange, obviously. But I think that doing something like batch writing out a hash of all trades that have occurred on the exchange on chain periodically would help create an immutable proof and record of what had happened on the venue. I think allowing users to write out their history in an encrypted way on chain if they want to could help users be able to create a specific backup for themselves, which would be helpful. And then obviously having reporting to regulators which have oversight of what the risk metrics look like, and can verify those, I think would help as well.
I got a quick question about Dan Friedberg, your chief regulatory officer. This is a guy.
I don't feel comfortable like talking about other people without getting sort of their sign off on that. So I think there's a limited extent to which I'm going to be willing or feel comfortable speaking on others' behalves.
No, that's totally fair. And I don't want you to speak on his behalf, obviously. I want you to share your unique perspective on the situation. Just like the same, I might ask a question about Caroline Ellison, but I only could expect your position on the situation. So kind of the situation there is obviously this is sort of a tale of two stories about how FTX failed. One is like a lack of regulation, a lack of clarity, the kind of just this thing that accumulated over time. The other one is, of course, a story of fraud. Of course, we have to look at who were the adults in the room. One of the adults obviously was Dan Friedberg, chief regulatory officer. I'm sure you're aware he was behind the ultimate bet scandal where he gave players God mode in a poker game where people could see the hands, and he actually basically conspired with Russ Hamilton to hide that. So does that suggest something about your intention that you hired a guy that basically one of his biggest achievements was hiding fraud? Can you explain sort of your thinking? I know you don't want to talk about him. Can you explain your thinking about why this would be the guy you choose as the chief regulatory officer?
We had a number of people in the legal department. That was maybe our fastest growing department. We had a number of outside law firms as well. Dan was obviously one of the people who had been working for FTX for a while. He's
the chief guy. He should have caught some of this stuff, you'd think, in theory.
Well, when you say he's the chief guy, I mean there's we also had general counsels. We had other positions as well. But I can't speak to what other people's views were, what they thought or knew or were intending when. But I know that our legal and regulatory team had an enormous task in front of them. We were looking to get licensed and regulated in dozens of jurisdictions at once. We did end up doing that. that was an unbelievably large undertaking, which I think, took up most of the time of, most of our legal compliance departments. And, in retrospect, I think, probably took up too much time. But at the end of the day, I was CEO, and that means that at the end of the day, it's on me to make sure that we have people who are in charge of, all of the important things. And I did that for some of the areas. I failed to do that for others.
But why'd you choose him specifically? I mean, obviously, you could have chosen a lot of different lawyers to go with. And I understand you had multiple lawyers, but if this story of FTX is largely a failure of regulation, a failure of controls at an organization, and your chief regulatory officer is Dan Friedberg, the question is, well, maybe this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't put a guy like this in front of this. I'm not obviously saying it's his fault solely, but I'm just asking sort of what was the thinking behind putting this guy in charge? Because it seems like you couldn't pick a less qualified candidate if you want to get actual regulation in the room.
I'm pretty I didn't say this was a failure of regulation, and we did an enormous amount of work on, getting licensed and regulated. We're licensed in more jurisdictions than I think any other exchange was. I think it was absolutely a failure of oversight of risk management. But and I think that, in retrospect, I would have viewed the core duties and things I needed to make sure of more so than anything else very differently than I did. But from a becoming licensed perspective, we did do quite a bit there, and were able to accomplish that in a fairly short period of time. And so I think I'm not sure that I completely agree with the premise of that framing of the question. And I'll just say that, like, the people who work with FTX, like, I have enormous respect for most of them, and they did enormously valuable work. And they didn't do all the work. Obviously, there are really important things that didn't get done. But that's on me as CEO to make sure that there are people who are doing all of the important things, because there's way too much to do. We're doing way too much as a company for any particular person to be expected to be definitely on top of even of some important things, given how many other important things they also had to be dealing with at the time. And by the way, I do apologize. I am fairly late at this point. For next thing, I do have to hop off.
Sam, thank you so much for your time, and Coffeezilla and other speakers. Thank you so much, Marty. Everybody, thank you so much for your questions. And I think all I can hope right now is good for community in a way. I'm not sure how, Sam, you will do it, but still there are people who have lost money. They want their money back.
Yep.
They need their money back, right? So just a request, because I cannot do anything to you, not that I have intent to, but if you can do something to get their money back, please try your best.
I will do
I know US.
everything
You said US
I can.
solvent is So you said FTX is solvent. Let's make sure that you are able to somehow get other people's money back too. Though the hopes are very low, but that's all I can wish for right now.
I'm doing everything
Thank you so much.
can.
What changed so fast? What changed these things that FTX just collapsed overnight, and it was on the weekly or monthly support of $22, for example, FTT, everything came down. Well, it has to come down, but from the company perspective.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, I feel really bad about what happened, and it's the last thing that I wanted to happen. The basic answer is that Alameda had a big margin position open on FTX, and it had gotten hit over the course of the year. I was not paying nearly as much attention to this as I should have been. And then over the last month, and really particularly sort of in the wake of the tweets at the beginning of November, that position took a giant hit in a really short period of time. And there was a total run on the bank, and there was sort of a correlated, everything selling off pretty hard at the same time, which pushed that margin position into a place where it wasn't going to be able to be sold off to be able to be liquidated effectively, and and generate what needed to be generated. And then at the same time, that there was a run on the bank. Everyone was withdrawing all the funds that they had on the platform, something like $4 billion a day, and so we're going to need effectively immediate liquidity. for everything, and that wasn't going to be able to happen. And so, all of that happened over something like a 2 or 3 day period, at the start of November. And by the time, we were even at November, 9th, we had basically no ability to, no more ability to process many withdrawals, and we're, facing an absolutely massive liquidity crunch. And yeah.
But Sam, sorry, like the thing is here, like, and we as, let's say, I will just put myself as YouTuber, not
Yep.
influencer or anything, or even a common person, we say you should never take money on loan to trade.
Yep.
And here you took customers' money. Like, what exactly and why you did that? Though, like, you didn't feel bad about it, or like, not. I'm not even talking about from moral standards. If I even Google it today, it says you worth 26 billion. Well, used to. You never hired any CA or an accountant to check things, and you just stole users' money.
So,
And again, sorry for the hard
no,
question.
I
I'm just asking,
totally
like,
understand.
because if somebody, okay, so I used to respect you a lot. Let me just put it personally like this.
Yep.
Not just because you're from MIT. I know what you did to Binance in a like a trading thing, and that's my personal opinion, right? But with all these things, you're saying you took margin and that money was not yours, because you can do whatever with your money, take margin, lose that whole money, millions, billions of dollars. But why with the users' money who trusted you, who trusted FTX as like brand? Because this is, like what it created in the market, right? Not just that
Yep.
it will create a crypto winter, but also maybe many people kill themselves. I'm not sure. I don't have the data, but what is this all about, though?
I feel incredibly bad about what happened, and I had not been trying to do that. I hadn't been trying to take users' money. I wasn't running Alameda at the time. I hadn't been for a little while. And FTX had accounting on its side. It was able to keep track of its finances, its own sort of corporate finances. But what there is a total failure of, effectively on FTX's side was risk management. Was someone who's looking at customer positions, at the size, magnitude of those, what the risk of those were, what they'd look like under a crash scenario. And while I only had a lot of collateral posted, it was a position that wasn't going to be able to survive especially in retrospect, a very large, concentrated correlated market move. And so, that was a huge failure on FTX's part, and it was a failure on my part not to be overseeing that, not to be making sure that there was someone who was chiefly responsible for that, for overseeing it. I was surprised at how big it was. And I had been mostly not paying attention to Alameda's trading
How you
or
cannot pay
position.
attention, Sam? Like, this is not like $10 or $100.
I
Even for
know.
that, like, even like today, if I even send like $100 to somebody, or
Yep.
like $10 to somebody for giveaway, I pay attention, and I'm like, I'm
Yep.
nobody in this whole thing. But you're saying you didn't pay attention, that too with people's money. Like, you have all these CAs, all this money to make things right, and
Yep.
then just saying I'm sorry or I was not paying attention. How you will compensate to those people who like lost everything in this thing?
I mean, it's, as you said, it's really bad, and it's a really, really big sort of, and it's a massive scale mistake. And I think, getting a bit less grounded. I think I was not paying, I was spending way too much time, dealing with, maybe isn't the right word, thinking about, new opportunities for FTX, thinking about extensions, thinking about what could happen, thinking about what sort of, what the
So you're
future
saying
could hold on,
you're
like, an
thinking about
upside
like
position.
future expansion of FTX, but you left the core business to somebody or nobody?
Well, some parts of the core business I was still paying close attention to, but clearly not all of them. And there are a lot that I sort of, mostly neglected, and I think I left it to nobody as much as anything. I mean, I think I one in addition to me not having in addition to me not paying nearly enough attention to it, there also wasn't clearly someone who was in charge of doing that. It's not that that I had delegated that in a clear way. I didn't do that either, and so specifically when it comes to position risk management on FTX, internationally, there wasn't someone who was really chiefly empowered with overseeing that.
So you're saying FTX, sorry about that, that's just my question. You're saying such a big organization, FTX, with like being number one in one, like someday, or number two, whatever, right? With all that potential, you're saying nobody was managing the money properly, nobody was in the position to do that, and it was all vague? That's what you're saying?
From the perspective of customer positions, yeah, no one was chiefly in charge of that. Obviously, bits and pieces of that would get, sort of ad hoc monitored in various ways. But there was no one who ultimately was responsible, saw themselves as being responsible for customer positions, for, risk management on those.
Not for customer position. Let customer manage that. I'm talking about the money that customer had deposited to your account. I'm talking about that part.
Oh,
and you're talking about that part too, because we are talking about money. Because
right.
customer position, maybe you guys, I will not go there right now. That exchange do trade against the customer, they front run them. Let's not go there because you have all the data to do that, or any exchange has the data. My question is more about the money that was deposited, because the liquidity crisis came in when you didn't have money to pay, right? There was a bank run, yes, but that should not have affected you. Like, okay, it's your money, take it. So you're saying there was no like a CFO that was taking care of it, or I don't know what you call in your language for that, but
totally hear you. So so FTX didn't trade. It didn't trade against users itself, and
Alameda did, because Alameda is mainly the trading firm.
Alameda was a trading firm. That's right, and FTX did have accounting for its own finances, for looking at its own corporate finances. The problem was that this was it was Alameda's position, but it was a customer position. And most customers on FTX were doing some amount of margin trading, of posting collateral in order to put on a leverage position on a futures contract or a spot contract or something. And what that means at the end of the day is that most of the accounts, at least most of the large accounts on the exchange, were ended up short something, whether it's futures contract, whether it's spot, whether it's something else. And in order for that system to work, it should be the case that, if FTX had to margin call that, if FTX had to, come and effectively liquidate that position, that they could do so, selling off all of those assets on behalf of the customer, such that I could still generate all of the dollars, or whatever the short side was, or closing down the futures positions, such that could all happen while the account was still net positive. That was sort of the core goal that FTX was supposed to be able to meet there. And in this case, that obviously didn't happen. That wasn't possible, which was a huge mistake. And the reason is that position was too big, it was too illiquid, and on top of those two, it was something which had correlated assets which were liable to fall all at the same time, and all at the time that there was a lot of pressure on the exchange. And that
talking about FPT, for example, here, right?
Right, exactly. And so it from FTX's perspective looked like a customer putting on a position, but that position was not reasonable from a risk management perspective, and ended up not having sufficient liquidity.
But still, that it doesn't explain like how you can use users' money, right? But that's maybe an unanswered question.
So
like,
and I do apologize for some of this, because I'm still trying to look into part of what happened and don't have access to all of the data. But on a margin trading platform, a lot of accounts have effectively have short positions on, which means that the total gross value of all the long positions that users have is larger than the net total position people have on, because of those margin positions. But again, that's supposed to happen in a way where everything could be closed down if needed.
anyway, like I think there are other people who can ask something along these lines better than me because I still don't understand how you can use users' money, but that's okay. What date you came to know about all this, and why no proper communication from you till the last date, or like one day before that, prior to that, you guys were like, "Oh, we have enough money," and even the CEO of Alameda Research, she was like, "Okay, we will buy FTT on this on this price." What date you came to know about all these things? Because you said, "Oh well, there is nobody who was taking care of it." What date, what month, what day you came to know about it?
And it was, in the wake of the crash that happened. We were frantically putting everything together, frantically doing a lot of the position and risk analysis on Alameda's account, particularly, that obviously we should have carefully done a long time earlier. And over the course of that few day period, and really over the first day or so, we came to understand what the actual exact situation was. And over the course of that next day or two, it became clear that basically the market moving around the bank were going to be large enough that it was going to be very difficult for us to be able to meet demand. And we started looking as quickly as we could to raise funds to do anything we could to try to be able to fill that demand. And I really wish that I had communicated much more than I did. I should have done that. I should have just been communicating what I knew when I knew it. I wasn't sure what to say. I was not that it matters or is an excuse for this. I was under a lot of competing pressures from a lot of people on what and how to communicate there, and I ended up mostly sort of freezing up from a public communication perspective for a while. And that was in retrospect a mistake.
Well, Sam, we cannot. People lost money here. They lost life.
Yeah.
We cannot just say mistake. I'm not sure.